Kyle walked into his baby's nursery and froze. A full-grown bobcat was curled beside the crib, its golden eyes locked not on him, but on his sleeping daughter. It didn't move. It didn't growl. It watched, and just hours later, the camera revealed why. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Kyle hadn't spoken a word since the bobcat disappeared into the trees. He sat hunched over the desk in the dim corner of their living room, bathed in the cold glow of the monitor, his fingers trembling slightly above the keyboard. The baby monitor's hard drive whirred, spinning back hours of footage. Beside him, Emily stood with baby Nora nestled against her shoulder, the child's warm coos a jarring contrast to the icy silence that had gripped the house. He rewound again, frame by frame, unable to make sense of what he'd seen. Not just the image of a bobcat beside their child, but its behavior, its posture, the way it never once shifted its gaze from the crib. It hadn't paced. It hadn't sniffed around the room or searched for an escape route. It had entered with intent, with focus. Emily finally broke the silence. It wasn't going to hurt her. Kyle turned, eyes wide, pale. You felt that too? Emily nodded, her throat dry. It looked like it was watching over her. The footage stopped buffering. Midnight. The screen lit up with grainy night vision footage. Static danced briefly before stabilizing. The room came into view, blanketed in the soft shadows of sleeping innocence. The crib, the mobile above it, the moonlight streaming through the sheer curtains. Then, without a sound, movement at the window. The screen's time code blinked. 12:48:03 a.m. The bobcat emerged from the darkness like a ghost materializing. It climbed the sill with calculated silence, nudged the screen aside with practiced ease, and landed softly on the nursery rug. Emily gasped. Kyle leaned in closer. The animal didn't stalk or sniff. It walked directly to the crib, rose slightly on its hind legs and peered down. Then, like a well-trained dog, it sat, its tail wrapped neatly around its feet. It watched the baby. For over 2 hours, it barely moved. Kyle paused the footage and stared at the screen. No one's going to believe this. Emily swallowed. That's not what matters. He looked at her, his voice hollow. Then what does? Emily held Nora tighter and whispered, Why it came at all. Kyle pressed play again. The digital clock ticked forward. 2:13:47 a.m. Something moved in the hallway. A shadow, a figure, and everything they thought they knew about that night was about to change. The cursor blinked like a metronome of dread as Kyle scrubbed the footage back to the moment, 12:48 a.m., when the window darkened with movement. The grainy infrared image flared as the bobcat appeared, materializing from the void beyond the glass like something summoned, not merely wild. It pressed a silent paw against the screen's edge, tested the frame, then eased it open with an unsettling familiarity. The frame gave way with no resistance. Kyle's jaw clenched. He'd meant to fix that screen weeks ago. The bobcat moved like liquid shadow, slipping through the narrow opening and landing without a sound. Even pixelated, its body radiated power. Shoulders rolling with a hunter's precision, haunches tight with controlled energy, but its intent was wrong. Off. Predators sniff, explore, prepare to strike. This one, this animal, barely glanced around the room. It walked straight to the crib like it knew what lay inside. It didn't peer over the edge with idle curiosity. It leaned in and watched, ears twitching with every rustle of blanket or breath. And then it sat, still, as if it belonged there. Kyle's breath had turned shallow. Emily's grip on his shoulder was tight, fingers trembling. The video ticked forward. Time accelerated. 1 minute became 5, 5 became 20. The bobcat didn't sleep, didn't stir. Nora shifted once, her arms twitching in a dream, and the bobcat only adjusted its position slightly, closer to the crib, flank brushing the leg of it like a guardian standing post. Then, at 2:13:47 a.m., the screen changed. A shape. A faint bloom of motion in the hallway outside the room. The nursery door, barely visible in the monitor's angle, caught the edge of something tall and narrow moving toward it. The figure came closer, the ambient light of the hallway warping around a hooded silhouette. Long limbs, hesitant steps. The figure raised a hand. Gloved. It reached for the doorknob. Inside the nursery, the bobcat moved instantly. No hiss, no bark, no theatrics, just raw muscle snapping into tension. It stood, back arched, hackles raised, and then a sound, guttural, ancient, a low, resonant growl that didn't come from the throat, but from the spine. The sound of claim, of warning, of danger unchained. The figure outside froze, then stepped back, then vanished. Kyle felt a cold sweat on his neck. He didn't move as Emily covered her mouth, eyes glassing over with terror. Nora had been targeted, but she hadn't been alone. The living room was thick with the presence of strangers, uniforms, holsters, radios crackling with codes that meant nothing to the people whose world had tilted on its axis just hours earlier. Emily sat motionless on the couch, baby Nora pressed against her chest like armor. Her eyes remained fixed on the large, muted television mounted above the fireplace, though she wasn't watching the screen. She was waiting for confirmation, for comprehension, for something to anchor her to a reality that suddenly felt mythical. Across from her, Kyle stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, as two detectives reviewed the footage again on his laptop. They hadn't said much at first. Just quiet exchanges between one another, a few raised brows, a pointed gesture toward the timestamp where the hooded man appeared and retreated. Then came the second knock, softer, hesitant. Wildlife control. A woman named Marla, broad-shouldered and blunt-eyed, held a clipboard and a tablet. "Your animal has a tag," she said flatly. "BC17, from our database." She tapped her screen, pulled up a profile. "Tagged 3 years ago, male, taken in as an orphaned cub, raised by one of our volunteers." She turned the screen toward them. The photo was unmistakable. Familiar eyes, a scar over the left brow, same deep copper pelt. BC17, and next to him, arms wrapped around the young cat, grinning wide and shirtless under a sun-faded Broncos cap, was Travis. Emily's breath caught. She didn't speak, just stared at her brother's face as if the air had been knocked out of her. Kyle stepped closer. "Travis, that's..." Marla nodded. "Travis Gannon. He worked with us for years. Brought in BC17 after its mother was hit by a snowplow off Route 21. He was one of the best we had. Gentle, patient, stubborn as hell." She glanced at Emily. "You knew him well, I take it?" Emily nodded slowly, voice trembling. "He was my brother. He died last year. Car crash." Marla's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. He spoke of you constantly. Said his bobcat followed you around like a dog. Thought it could smell the baby growing inside you." Emily's hand trembled over Nora's back. She whispered, almost to herself, "He used to bring him here, all the time. I didn't know he brought him in the house." "He didn't need to," Marla said. "They imprint, especially when raised from the bottle. He remembered you, your scent, your daughters." Outside, the trees swayed beneath a silent wind. Somewhere out there, a creature once thought wild had felt danger before it had a name, and come home. The air outside had changed. It wasn't colder or warmer. It simply felt still, like the forest itself was waiting. Kyle stood barefoot by the window in his flannel pajama pants and worn gray hoodie, cradling a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Dawn had barely begun to peel itself from the edge of the mountains, casting the backyard in soft gradients of pale blue and silver. The house was quiet. Emily and Nora still slept, the baby's monitor crackling gently from the kitchen counter. The bowl Kyle had left out, raw chicken this time, dusted with a touch of liver, was empty, as it had been each of the last 3 mornings. But tonight felt different. Final. He couldn't explain it, only that he had risen before the alarm, driven by something quiet and invisible threading through his chest. Then, at the edge of the tree line, a shadow peeled itself from the underbrush. BC-17 stepped into the clearing like a memory made flesh. No longer a rumor on video or a blur in the night, he was here. Muscles coiled beneath that copper coat, tail swaying low, ears flicking as he scanned the yard with the self-possession of a monarch. And then his gaze landed on the window. Kyle didn't move. He only watched, his heart pressing upward into his throat. The bobcat approached slowly, not with caution, but with deliberateness, like every step was part of some final rite. He stopped a few feet from the glass. For a full minute, maybe more. They stood there, man on one side, beast on the other. Their eyes locked. No gestures, no sound. But in the silence, a conversation passed between them. Kyle didn't need to speak. The understanding was deeper than words. You kept her safe. You knew where to be. Thank you. And from the bobcat, something older, something timeless. I remember. I remember him. I remember you. And I know she matters. Then, as silently as he'd come, the bobcat turned and vanished into the trees for the last time. The town didn't let the story die. Within days, the legend took root. The local news aired the footage, stripped of names but heavy with emotion. Children drew crayon bobcats in school and taped them to the Westbrook's mailbox. A bakery in town renamed its sugar cookies Guardian's Paw. People stopped Kyle in the hardware store and whispered thanks, as if the creature had blessed the whole town by simply passing through. But behind the public awe lived a quieter truth, one only Kyle and Emily carried. This wasn't a random act of nature. It was the echo of a bond never broken, a promise fulfilled, a brother's legacy, walking on 4 silent feet.